Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On the show today, I have a special guest. His name is Andrew Z. Adkins III, and he, with his father, A.Z. Adkins Jr., I believe. Are you junior or are you the third?
I'm the third.
You are the third, so I had it right. Published a book. The title of the book is You Can't Get Much Closer Than This, Combat with Company H, the 317th Infantry Regiment, 80th Division. And it was originally published in 2005. There's a newer version from 2020, and you'll see the newer cover. If you're on YouTube, you can see the new cover of this book. Again, it's You Can't Get Much Closer Than This, and it retells very fascinating first-person story of his father fighting in World War II. But Andrew III can talk more about that. So Andrew Adkins, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. And let's start off by saying most everybody calls me Andy, like my dad.
Gotcha. So, Andy, can you talk about the genesis of this book and how it kind of came to be about, and how you got the first publication done?
Certainly. Well, like most kids in the baby boomer generation, I grew up. My dad fought in World War II, and in that generation, you hear stories growing up. Most of them are humorous. Very rarely do you talk about the bad stuff, so to speak. And so I grew up with a lot of those, and other classmates of mine whose fathers also fought in World War II. It was just that generation. For Christmas in 1984, my father gave my sister and I a 3-ring binder, and it was titled A World War II Diary. I had no clue what he had done, and this was the first time I didn't even know he had been keeping a diary or a journal. And my mother told me later on that he'd been working on off and on, and like most veterans who try to record some of their memoirs or memories, that some days you can write things down, other days you just have to get away from it. But in 84, he gave my sister and I this 200-page double-spaced 3-ring binder. And of course I read it, as did my sister. And I read it several times, and my eyes were opened.
And that really retold his story of World War II, right?
It did, first person, and it was a diary, day to day. And it really, you see something like that. In the 90s they called it a paradigm shift. I don't know what they call it now, but you have a much better awareness of who your father is and what he did during the war, and a better understanding of who I am because of what he and my mom, to an extent. Now, they didn't meet until after the war. My dad was a bachelor, going in and coming out, and finished when the war was over. He came back to Florida and went to law school. His father was a lawyer and a judge, and actually a Florida state senator. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away before I was even born, so I never got a chance to meet or talk with him. But my dad was very much part of our lives. So he gave us this diary, and I read it and just kind of put it down because, life got busy. I have 2 kids of my own, had a career, et cetera, et cetera. Well, my dad passed away in 1989. He was 3 days short of 3 days short of turning 69. So we lost my dad, and my mom was still around. And a few years later, I'm a computer guy, a technology guy. So I took his diary and scanned it, digitized it, and converted it into, back then it was WordPerfect. And I said, there's really something here, and I really want to leave something to my kids so that they would know who their grandfather was. And I worked on this off and on, nights and weekends for several years, and finally got to the point I said, there's something here. But there was some things missing. Obviously, there was some terminology used in World War II that we kind of all hear about, but I didn't really know what some of the terms were. So I did a little more research, added stuff in here and there. My dad attended the Citadel up in Charleston, South Carolina. I actually made a trip up there and met with the archivist, and she provided me a lot of materials because my dad was in the Citadel when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Right. December 7th, 1941.
1941, yeah. So he still had another couple of years to finish. And he had told me, my father had said, after when Pearl Harbor attacked, most of the cadets were ready to join. And a few of them did. But his father basically said, this war is going to be around for a while. And unfortunately, he was right. So my dad graduated from the Citadel, went to OCS, commissioned a second lieutenant, and joined the 80th Division out in the California-Arizona maneuver area, commonly called CAMA. And that was in November of 1943. So long story short, I was doing a lot of this research and wanted to have this thing published. And I did what most new authors who don't know what they're doing do. You shotgun it to a lot of different publishers along with a cover letter and say, I've got this. What do you think? Are you interested? And, a year or so went by because I wasn't on this. I still had a full-time job. Finally, there was a gentleman out of California that called me. And he said, Andy, I think you've got something here. I'd like to work with you on it. It needs work. And I said, I'm all over that. So long story short, another year later, Casemate picked it up and published it in October of 2005. And a month later, it was selected as the book of the month for the Military Book Club.
Oh, interesting.
It really was. I was like, I have no idea how all this stuff works. I mean, I'm an engineer, I'm not a publisher or a writer. So that's kind of how the first one got published. And I'll tell you this, I had been in touch with a lot of my dad's old division veterans from the 80th Division. I actually am part of that Veterans Association as a family member. Met a lot of guys that served with him, and many people were interested in this book because when I published this, there were probably less than a dozen World War II books, chronicles, nonfiction that were out there. People just weren't ready to write it down or whatever. So I really didn't have a lot to go on. Since then, of course, there's been a lot of memoirs and a lot of books written. But that's kind of how this got to the point where I got it published.
And one of the interesting aspects in the book is that your dad was injured, so that gave him time to write all this down in the binder, right? So while he was recuperating before going back to the front, I thought that was interesting. But can you talk about his move? He kind of, I think he wrote that he landed in France in D-Day plus 60. Can you talk about how he moved through the U.S. and made his way to France?
Sure. And by the way, when my dad gave me the diary actually starts in mid-August of when they were just about through Argentan and ready to, early part of September, ready to cross the Moselle River. One of the editors told me that's a good start. However, how did he get to that point? How did he become a soldier? So the first two chapters are sort of what I filled in based on what their requirements are and what I picked up at the Citadel in the archives. So my dad graduated from the Citadel in 43, joined the 80th out in the California-Arizona maneuver area in the desert, and a lot of training out there because we were still fighting the war in the deserts of North Africa, and that's where the 80th may have gone. And so they did a lot of training there with other divisions and so forth. But when that was done, then they basically hopped on a train, ended up in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and were preparing to embark on ship overseas, which they did in July, I think July 4th, 1944, aboard aboard the Queen Mary. And they sailed over it. It said it took about a week. and he he talks about standing hours in the chow line because they were sending a lot more than just cruise passengers over. They were sending, tens of thousands of troops over. So
I think he said there were 27,000 people on it
on the ship over. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you probably don't. There's not a lot. I mean, there's a few books out there that talk about the trip over and show some of the scenes, but most of the pictures that we see these days are when the Liberty ships came back, and you see the decks just covered. I mean, you can't even see the deck. You could just only see lots of people, lots of heads. But it was very similar to that, just tons of people. So they ended up in July in Firth of Clyde, Scotland, which is where they first landed. Ended up getting down to South, and they trained in England for probably a month, just getting organized, getting, just the whole logistics of this. Now, keep in mind that, D-Day was June 6th. So that they didn't even start the trip over until after D-Day started. So, they're hearing pieces, they're reading the newspaper of what's going on over there. And the anticipation of joining in that battle. I mean, I think a lot of people were like, we've been training for 2 years. We're ready to go. We're ready to help our other soldiers. So they ended up taking a small boat, an LST, over from Southampton, England, landed on Utah Beach. The 80th Division landed anywhere between August 3rd and August 8th, I think. And there's an initial team that goes over and sets things up for logistics, and then they ship the troops over in regiments. And I think my dad landed on August the 6th in 1944. And you basically march, or you truck to a certain organization area where you get everybody together. And that takes a few days, and then the next thing is you have orders to either attack or march, and that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, and so he was assigned to Patton's Third Army, right? So he's in northern France, headed east at that time into France, and then towards Germany. What can you talk about the beginnings of his conflict and what he experienced in the beginning battles that he took part in? He was also a mortar captain. Can you explain what he did as part of his battalion?
Sure. In the Army in World War II, a division consisted of 3 rifle regiments, and those rifle regiments for the 80th were the 317th, the 318th, and the 319th. And my dad was in the 317th. Each of those regiments has 3 battalions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Each battalion has 3 rifle companies and 1 heavy weapons company. So 1st Battalion would be rifle companies A, B, and C, and a heavy weapons company D. The 2nd Battalion would be rifle companies E, F, and G, and a heavy weapons company H. And my dad was company H, heavy weapons. Heavy weapons consisted of 81 millimeter mortars and 30 millimeter medium machine guns. They were water cooled. So when you see the big tube at the end, that's probably from a heavy weapons company. And my dad was a mortar man, so to speak. So he was in charge of a section of mortars, which consisted of platoons and then squads. So there would probably be 6 to 8 81 millimeter mortars under his command.
Gotcha. And you'll see that on the cover of your book, the most recent edition. I think you see these mortar companies operating.
Yeah.
So, they're you have these artillery battles and mortar battles. It's right from the beginning, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and keep in mind that, they were in, 2 months after the invasion. So they're still fighting Germans in northwestern France, even though that they're pushing things through. But I think I think there were 29 army divisions that fought in Europe. And so, everybody had their own mission, and most of the 80th Division was in northern France, from the west coast of Normandy all the way through to the east coast where the Moselle is. And then that pushes into Germany. Now, part of the 80th was in Belgium, and all of the 80th was in Luxembourg. That's where they fought most of the Battle of the Bulge.
Right. So he started, and also the Falaise Pocket, he was involved in those actions right there at the beginning, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, his baptism of fire was in a place called Argentan, France.
And can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, so they landed the first week in August, and a week later they had orders to take this town called Argentan. And the way the Army works is different regiments within a division are given specific assignments. And so the 317th was to take the city of Argentan. And my dad describes it in fairly good detail. But this was what they call the baptism of fire. This is also where he killed his first German that he knew he killed with a rifle. That was hard for him to talk about. But when you're a mortar man, you're throwing mortar and artillery shells, hundreds of thousands of yards away. So you're given a target and you shoot. You know that you're causing damage. You know you're causing death. But that's just kind of the support, heavy weapon support does. And so, the town of Argentan, I think it took 1 or 2 days before they were able to, before the town surrendered. And the Germans either surrendered, they captured prisoners, or they fled. And that was just kind of the start. I mean, the 80th Division's motto is always move forward, or only moves forward. It depends on who you talk to, but that was actually from World War I. But when you read the book, there wasn't a lot of retreating. There was mostly just moving from the time they got there in August until the end of the war in May.
Right. And there was kind of hope that the war was going to end by Christmas. They might have thought that, but it turned out to be kind of a longer slog. And there were atrocities right there from the beginning by the Germans, correct?
Yes, as my dad describes, yes.
Can you talk about that?
The only things that I know about are what I've read, not only in the book, but also in other places. I mean, war is war. And there are atrocities just no matter where you are or what you're part of. The Germans, they killed because they were invading. They were taking over Europe. This was one of the reasons why the United States entered the war, at least in Europe. So, they were trying to keep the Germans from, taking over Europe. And, they were our allies. So, we were fighting alongside them.
Right. And then, so there were also troubles, like they kind of, during the march towards Germany, they encountered a lot of SS troops and had trouble with them specifically, correct?
As my dad described, yes.
Can you talk about that?
It's been a while since I've read those passages, but from what I remember, my dad describes, the SS troops as being, they basically were not nice people. They were fanatics about, Nazism, and that they were, trying to instill their beliefs. And so there were a lot of times when they were, killing people and in some cases murdering them for whatever reasons. I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't really describe other than what's in the book.
Right. And like he talks about, like all the infantrymen know they're going to be hit. Can you talk about the losses that he saw and some of the people he fought with? Like they're just constantly, it was really kind of a meat grinder, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what war does. There were a lot of injuries. And to this day, I still do a lot of research for people. I built and maintained the 80th Division Veterans Association website, and there's hundreds of thousands of documents and images and things on there, and people still contact me looking for information about their fathers. So I go through a lot of the morning reports, and one of the things that really gets to me sometimes is that someone will ask about their father or their grandfather, and say, can you help me understand what he went through? And I'll look through, and I think what bothers me the most is I see somebody coming in as a replacement, and 2 weeks later they're killed in action. It's just devastating, because of the fighting, the lack of experience, the attacks, all of those types of things. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mayhem. I mean, that's what war is.
Yeah, and I think he wrote that only 2 of the original 37 line officers were left after they attacked Civray in France, I think, something like that. So constantly, people are dropping, including him. So he ends up getting shot. Can you talk about how his medical evac?
Sure. That one I'm fairly familiar with. I just actually wrote about that in last week's blog. But he was in Civry, France, which is still it was just across the Moselle River. And Civry is located between 2 large mountains, St. Genevieve and Mount St. Jean. And Mount Tulin and Mount St. Jean. And so that's where a lot of the German artillery was. Now, my dad being an officer in a mortar platoon, a lot of times what he did was he would act as a forward observer. So he would be somewhere ahead trying to direct. He's closer to the front lines, trying to direct his mortars for certain targets. And when they were in Civry, he describes that he was in the second floor of an abandoned German house that had already been battered by artillery. Ours or theirs, I don't know. But he was setting up a line of sight and giving instructions for his mortars, and they had only fired off a couple of shots. And the next thing he knows, he was unconscious. And from what he describes is that a German 155 artillery shell had hit the house he was in, and the roof caved in and trapped him. The beam was on his leg. Next thing he knows is one of his good friends, another lieutenant named Saul Caddison, which his nickname was Cad, was in there just trying to wake him up, throw water on him, slap him around, and eventually just helped him get out from underneath that timber. And my dad's long story was that his cartilage was shattered. He could still hobble, but very slowly. So he was able to evacuate. This was in the middle of the town of Civry. And he was able to get back to his unit, which, by the way, was uphill. As he describes, uphill 2 miles from the town, and he had to hobble through a minefield, and he had actually gone down through the minefield to deliver supplies to his buddy Cad and to another unit, Company G. So he knew his way through the minefield, but going down was one thing because he had both legs. Going back up, he needed help from his sergeant. So they hobbled back through and got him back to his unit. And from there, he went to battalion aid. And he had a talk with his men, as he describes. He says, I probably won't see you for a while. Take care. And he describes it as just being very hard, because you grow close to someone in battle. Like the book says, you can't get much closer than this. So from there, he was evacuated to Paris and then ended up in a hospital in England for surgery and recuperation. Was there about 2 months, and he ended up coming back to his unit December 14th, like 2 days before the Battle of the Bulge began.
Right. And can you talk about that battle and his involvement in that?
Yep. So they were in a place in northern France when they got the word that the Battle of the Bulge began. And actually, my wife's father, his name was Dr. Rufus K. Broadway. He was in the 82nd Airborne, and he was aide de camp to General Gavin. And he received the first phone call from the front lines in Luxembourg saying, "We're being overrun." But that's a whole different story. But that was, there's a lot of connections here. So once the 80th Division received their orders, they basically traveled 150 miles, I think, in 24 hours straight, only stopping for gas, and open six-wheelers, troop carriers. So there wasn't any cover. It was just freezing cold all the way up. So they made it, and their mission was to protect what they call Radio Luxembourg in the city of Luxembourg. And he was involved with that transport, but also throughout the fighting in Luxembourg. I mean, there was a lot of action in a quick amount of time, as you can imagine.
Right. That was the biggest kind of conflict of the entire war for the Americans, was that battle. I think It was like 500,000 people each side. And really, and it was also, I think, the coldest winter in 50 years or something like that too. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And when you move that many people that quickly, you start off in France, and it's different climate there. It's same parallel, but it's just was totally different. And by the time they got there, and throughout January, I think they never really had the right equipment or the right clothing. And my dad describes that in the foxhole, a 2-man foxhole, that the first sergeant would issue one blanket to every 2-man foxhole. That way one man could sleep and stay awake. And one man would sleep and stay warm. The other would, stay awake, and they'd swap off every hour or two. But it was just that cold, and they just didn't have the right type of clothing.
Right. And they did have trench foot, all kinds of problems with that. And I think Patton said you got to hold to the last man. So, so that was a very fascinating part of the book. And then, so after that, I mean, it was basically kind of the movement into Germany, right?
It was. The whole thing about the spearhead, von Rundstedt's moving into Luxembourg to try to break the supply lines, and then the Third Army primarily, along with, I think, British troops, Canadian troops, kind of pushed them back. And once they broke that, it seemed to be that, the German army spirit, at least as my dad describes, and from other veterans and other books I've read, is that, they were tired as we were, but we were pushing them back. So it was almost, once we got through the Battle of the Bulge, there were rivers to cross, there was still weather to deal with, but we were moving faster and pushing the Germans back farther and faster than we had when we first got there.
It's almost like they sensed it was the end, because I think they had very ambitious plans with the Battle of the Bulge. They were going to go all the way to like Remagen or something, and literally cut the American army in half, and barely got, a third of of their goal. No gas, all kinds of problems. So I think they knew that it was the beginning of the end for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the official battle is called the Battle of the Ardennes, because it was in the Ardennes forest in Luxembourg. But because of this bulge, and you've seen maps, where it's just like this big bubble coming up, and how fast that expands because they broke the lines of the Allies. But then we responded so quickly, we were able to flatten the bulge and then move it back. So that was probably the turning point.
Turning point for the Western Front. And so they were just like always bombing small towns, moving through, crossing the Rhine. And he remembers stuff from Buchenwald too, right?
Oh yeah.
Do you want to talk about
that? Sure. So Buchenwald was, there's a lot of stories about that, and there's also several books that are written. There's probably the one that is the most detailed and most, official, is called the Buchenwald Report. And so By the way, I've actually been to Buchenwald and to Weimar. My wife and I were on a tour, a World War II tour, and met with several people. And one of the friends of the 80th Division, who's still around, offered a tour, and I had met him several times before. So my wife and I met this gentleman. He's a citizen of Weimar, and he walked us around Buchenwald. This was probably 8-9 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the crematorium is still there. The furnaces are still there. The jail is still there. The barracks are gone. There's one barracks that's still there, and it's a hard place to visit. And I actually wrote about it a couple of times. Just it helps me kind of put things in perspective. But when my dad was there, he describes it as they were approaching Buchenwald. They had no clue. I mean, everybody hears rumors. And so they kind of knew, what could possibly be around. But, you're going through woods and open fields, and there's nothing that you see. But he and his squad saw a group of men in striped uniforms heading their way. And so they've formed a skirmish line because they didn't know whether they were prisoners or whether they were Germans or Americans or what. But, it turns out that they had escaped. The prisoners actually overcame the guards. And when my dad and the 80th got there, which is a day or two after that, there were about 20,000, as he describes, inmates that were still enclosed, even though the gates were open. They just didn't know where to go. And most of these guys, the prisoners, they were as thin as a man you could ever imagine, hollowed eyes. A lot of them, he said thousands were just laying on the ground, just dead. But they were able to provide them, as I wrote, it's like, we called the company called battalion called regiment, and within a few hours there were trucks and trucks of supplies, medical personnel. And just, walking around and seeing and what you can't pick up off a TV is, the smells and the sense of this abandonment. And so he describes it as just horrific. And, I would imagine that in his mind is like, how can another human being do this to another?
And he verified some of the stories, the very lurid stories that came out of there. I mean, he verified that Ilse Koch, she was literally ripping skin off of people for their tattoos.
Oh, yeah.
So that was all that, according to him, was true, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's also in the Buchenwald report. So, yeah, he saw some of the lampshades. That was one example of what she did with the tattoos.
Right, like he visited the SS officer quarters and saw all that stuff. So that's really true. I mean, it's just a nightmare.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare story. So where's the best place that people can find? Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap up the interview?
I first of all, thank you very much for this.
My pleasure.
One of the things that I try to do is, we tend to have short-term memories. And so I'm involved in a lot of veterans groups. And being a Navy veteran myself, and I'm the Vietnam War era type veteran, is that, I still try to work with World War II veterans and their families, but now I'm starting to work more towards with Vietnam veterans and some of their families. And that's what I continue to write about. But yes, thank you for helping keep these memories alive through the podcast, through your interviews. The book is available. I've got several books that are all on Amazon.com. This one was published by Casemate Publishers. It's also available through them and through, I think, several other bookstores. But yeah.
Where is your additional writing when you're posting? Are you posting to a blog or a personal webpage?
I have both. I have my website is Adkins, Adkins, III. That's for the third. Adkins, III. .com. And I also write a weekly blog called A Veteran's Journey. I write about both what I did in the Navy, but also about my father in World War II. I try to combine, two of those, and I do that once a week. I'm also I've started writing fiction now, but it's strange because I pull from actual events in Vietnam and World War II. And that's another book that I just published earlier this year called Never Forget.
And that's historical fiction, is that correct?
It depends on who you ask, but it's contemporary fiction if you ask the literary agents, but it's historical fiction based on, true stories in World War II, some of which we've talked about, and also in Vietnam.
Gotcha. And repeat your website again one more time for me, please.
It's www.azadkinsii.com.
Great. So you can pick it up there. And then again, this book, the title of it again is You Can't Get Much Closer Than This, Combat with Company H, 317th Infantry Regiment, 80th Division, published 2020. You see the title here on YouTube. Highly recommend this book. It has excellent reviews on Amazon, by the way, like 145-star reviews. So congratulations on that. Again, the author is Andy Adkins, Adkins. So thank you so much, Andy.
My pleasure. Thank you, William. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well. Take care.
All right. You too.